Before I begin the video, I just want to take a quick moment to say I've always tried to be incredibly careful when making these videos. These topics can be incredibly difficult to discuss, and it's really easy to upset people without even meaning to do so. I can't tell you how many videos I've put on private or just never published because I questioned some aspect of that video, which is why I've opened this channel to memberships where members would have access to all of those videos along with early access and sneak peeks to my upcoming videos. I might even throw in a members-only live stream from time to time. But if memberships aren't for you and you really want to support this channel, you could always do so by leaving a tip in the tip jar, by clicking on the thanks option, or honestly just hitting the like button because it really does go a long way to help. I appreciate each and every one of you. So with that being said, grab a cup of coffee and let's get into the video, shall we? In my previous video, I described the Delphi case as a puzzle, where some of the pieces just didn't seem to fit or didn't fit properly due to other pieces preventing them from doing so. In specific, I discussed the concept of the killer crossing the creek on the day of the murders and the various reasons that decision has always bothered me. This video, much like that one, is going to continue down that same path by discussing other aspects of the case that never really seemed to fully make sense to me. I'm going to do my best to speculate about possible solutions to those things that I bring up here, but mostly I'm interested in your thoughts because frankly, if I knew the answers to these things, I wouldn't be putting them in this video. I don't care if you're pro-prosecution, pro-defense, or in between, or have a completely different theory of your own. I want to know what you think about these things. So long as you're not insulting each other and follow YouTube's community guidelines, I'm going to approve every comment that I see. So let's just go ahead and get right into it. And I think a good place to start is with this.
Prosecutors confirm they believe there's another suspect out there, while Allen's defense team say they don't believe there's enough evidence to even convict. Fox 59's Max Lewis joins us right now to break things down for us. Max, we know you talked to a former FBI agent about this case today. We have a lot of people weighing in, the twists and turns it's taking. What do they have to say?
Yeah, well, I talked to former FBI special agent in charge, Paul Keenan. He oversaw the Bureau's role in the Delphi case for nearly 2 years. And he said investigators always thought that the crime could have been committed by more than one person.
Nick McClellan saying in open court that he believed others were involved was, it was one hell of a thing to say. Mostly because there haven't been any other arrests that we're aware of. But to me, the most important part of that statement isn't who we might be talking about, it's the why. Why does Nick McClellan believe that other people were involved in the crime? At least to me, the known evidence released by the state and the defense, not the rumors, the actual evidence, what we all know conclusively about this case, it just doesn't scream to me that someone else was involved. Now, don't get me wrong, it does seem to suggest at times that someone else might have been involved, but from what we conclusively know about the publicly released details of the crime, there was nothing there that couldn't be explained away with only one person being involved. On the surface, it does seem like a somewhat easy answer to kind of explain away Nick McClellan's statement by citing things that were put out by the probable cause affidavit or the defense memorandum, but every time you actually try to do so, it's prevented by a different piece of the puzzle. For example, Suggesting that the witness who saw a younger man with curly hair on the bridge just before the girls arrived is one of the main reasons that I've heard people say that law enforcement believe that more than one person was involved in the crime. The problem with that logic is that Doug Carter himself said that he believes both of these two sketches were actually of the same person, and this sketch was made of the younger man that was seen on the bridge that day. So, according to Doug Carter himself, law enforcement don't think that these were two separate people. They believe it was the same person.
The sketch, and to be clear, and you did clarify this after, but in case folks didn't hear it, you don't want them to look at both sketches anymore. You only want the newly released sketch, correct?
That's correct. But remember, a sketch is not a photograph.
Right.
It's something similar to a resemblance. And the likelihood of this being something between the two is probably pretty strong.
Continuing with that same logic, suggesting that the audio on Libby's device was actually from a different person doesn't fit with Doug Carter when he said this.
We are releasing additional portions of the audio recording from that day. Please keep in mind, the person talking is one person and is the person on the bridge with the girls. This is not two different people speaking. Please listen to it very, very carefully.
Now, don't get me wrong, apparently there's been interviews with law enforcement where they revealed that, in fact, there were additional voices in the audio that haven't been heard by the public. But if those voices were from a second man, why would police have held that back and not released that person's voice? And better yet, why would the defense have left out that detail in their memorandum? They wrote 136 pages doing their absolute best to suggest that more than one person was involved in the crime. You would have imagined that they would have brought up a second man's voice in the recording if there was actually something like that there. So if Nick McClelland doesn't believe that other people were involved because of the witness sightings, and he doesn't believe it because there were additional voices on the audio, then why? And if you're going to suggest that McClelland came to that conclusion because of things that were suggested in the memorandum, like it was too difficult for one person to have accomplished all of the things that the killer did on the day of the murders, I don't know, it feels like a really big stretch. At least to me, there was nothing listed in the memorandum that one person couldn't have accomplished on their own. And McClelland can't be referring to the Odinist, mostly because the state ruled them out, and the defense made it clear that Richard Allen didn't know any Odinists and had never heard of them before. And since the state arrested Richard Allen, I highly doubt Nick McClelland was referencing the defense team's outside third-party strategy, because if he was, the defense sure as hell wouldn't have brought up Odinists in the first place. So, if there was nothing at the crime scene that couldn't have been accomplished by just one man, and according to law enforcement, they believe that witnesses only saw one man entering the trails on the day of the murders, then Nick McClelland had to have come up with this conclusion based on something else. Now, if you've watched my channel, I'm sure it's not surprising to you that my initial thought was that Nick McClelland was referencing the Anthony Shots account. It made complete sense with the current information we had at the time, and I felt extremely confident, as did many others, that someone connected to the Anthony Shots account was exactly who Nick McClelland was referring to. However, since McClelland's statements, new evidence has come out, namely that there was absolutely no digital evidence recovered during law enforcement's investigation that linked Richard Allen to the crime. So yeah, any communication with the Anthony Shots account is absolutely something that law enforcement would have brought up. Yet, here we are. As far as we know, no one has been arrested in regards to the Delphi case that had any kind of dealings with the Anthony Shots account, so very possibly was not that. I could go on, but I'm sure you get the point. Every good suggestion seems to have an equally good counter, and just like the other topics I'm going to discuss in this video, I would very much like to know your thoughts. But let's move on. Another thing that's bothered me for some time now, and it often seems to be overlooked or outright dismissed, was Liberty German's phone pings on the day and the night of her murder. Specifically, Liberty's phone pinging on multiple cell towers before being turned off, then apparently turning back on in the middle of the night and pinging at the Monon High Bridge. For years, the common answer to this, first part at least, is that the bridge is positioned between multiple towers in a way that made it completely plausible for her cell phone to have pinged off different towers just by the act of walking. And before this conversation dives into what could easily become a conspiracy theory, the whole concept of the girls being killed somewhere else is immediately challenged by the idea of the blood being found on the ground at the crime scene, the bullet being found at the crime scene, the drag marks being found at the crime scene. Everything points to the girls having been killed where they were found. I'm not really interested in the concept of Liberty's phone pinging off multiple towers. As I said, that can be explained away. What I'm much more interested in is why did Liberty German's phone turn back on in the middle of the night and ping a cell tower?
In the very early hours of the 14th of February, and not long after the official search had been called off for the night, Sheriff Tobe Lesenby was notified that a cell tower had picked up a signal from one of the girls' cell phones.
And I got a call, I think at 2:30 from the sheriff, and they were wanting some lighting to go out and see if we could find the cell phone because the latest ping was coming back to the area of the Monon High Bridge.
I have tried and tried to make this make sense to me for the longest time now, and I have just failed miserably at it. First, I'd suggested in a video that maybe Liberty's phone had gotten wet and powered back on once it dried off, but Liberty had an iPhone 6, and that phone can only be powered back on manually. So my next thought was, what if one of the girls was actually still alive when the killer left? But that immediately went out the window when it was released to the public that Abby was actually laying on top of the phone. And suggesting that she powered the phone on in the middle of the night and then put it under her back, that just seems totally unrealistic to me. So then I started to entertain the idea that the killer might have actually accomplished abducting them, and thus the cell phone pings were on different towers, and for whatever reason, he returned the girls in the middle of the night and killed them. It's crazy, but frankly, the solutions only seem to get crazier from here on out. And to make matters weirder, there are things out there that actually seem to add validity to that theory. Namely, search party members who swear up and down that they searched the spot the girls had been found in the previous day and they had actually seen nothing. And when you add that to this comment posted on Facebook from someone who claimed to be a member of the search party, who swore up and down that they could hear screams in the woods the night the girls were missing that were so loud that they actually called 911. And yeah, I mean, I'll give it to you, it does seem weird. But just like before, there's some very real issues with the theory. Namely that witnesses saw a bridge guy covered in mud leaving, and they only saw one person doing so. Law enforcement have been emphatic that the girls were not moved, and they would know time of death having access to the autopsy reports, so police lying about them having been in another location would have actually worked against their interest in finding the killer. So yeah, I have no idea why Liberty German's cell phone turned on in the middle of the night. I just don't understand how that happened. I would very much like to know your thoughts. Let's move on. So this last part's going to be controversial, and frankly, there's no way to discuss it otherwise. So trigger warning. I'm going to discuss the crime scene in detail, and if that's something that bothers you, this part of the video might not be right for you. But there were specific things that were mentioned in the defense's memorandum that the defense used to bolster their Odinism strategy, but regardless if you're inclined to believe the defense or if you think Richard Allen is guilty of sin, there are certain aspects of this crime that still don't make sense no matter what perspective you're looking at it from. In specific, the sticks that were placed on top of the girls' bodies. In a previous video where I discussed the sticks, I challenged the concept of them being runes by making the point that while the sticks that were on top of Abigail Williams do somewhat form a rune, the sticks that were on Liberty German most certainly do not. And I'm not saying this to just dismiss the defense or their theory. I'm saying it because the stick pattern that was on Liberty German objectively does not form any symbol that I'm aware of in the occult. And frankly, this diagram that was on Court TV is not accurate. This is a much more accurate representation of what the sticks actually looked like. To me, the problem isn't if this is a rune, because it isn't. The problem is why the hell the killer or the killers placed a few sticks in what does kind of feel like an intentional pattern on the bodies. In my prior video, I was trying to make sense of this, and I suggested that maybe that the killer was trying to cover them up or maybe even burn them, but frankly, I hate that explanation. It's just a lazy argument, and it ignores some pretty big details. Namely, the killer clearly had enough time to cover the bodies better if they'd wanted to. They had enough time to redress Abigail Williams and not one, but two sets of clothing, so he absolutely had time to cover them up better if he'd wanted to. The stick thing does kind of feel like a message, and while it's completely possible that maybe he just threw some sticks on the girls, I have a difficult time believing that. So if this pattern is intentional, and it's not a rune, what the hell is it, and why did he do it? I've driven myself crazy trying to figure this out, and I've only found one thing that somewhat kind of seems to line up with it, but frankly it's insane and I don't even know if I believe it myself. So when I present this, understand that it's just me trying to make sense of something that I don't feel anyone has given a good explanation for. But when the defense memorandum was first published, I saw numerous people here online post about the first episode of a television show called True Detective. Apparently in that show, they found a girl murdered in the woods with antlers tied to her head during some kind of a ritual sacrifice. And apparently the killer liked to form sticks into shapes and symbols, kind of Blair Witch style, and well, this is the stick pattern that they made in that episode. The episode was published in 2014, and the idea of a killer or killers being interested in true crime or shows that detail police work and how investigators work is entirely consistent with the behaviors exhibited by literally countless other serial killers. But honestly, I don't know how plausible an explanation like that is. But even if you do believe that Odinists were involved, you have to admit that this is not a rune. So if it's not a rune, what is it? And maybe I'm just looking too deeply and trying to find meaning in a situation that is frankly completely senseless. Maybe there is no reason that he did it. He just did it to do it, and there's no good explanation. But I don't know. It just feels like horrible things like this shouldn't be allowed to not have explanations. I'm very interested to know what your thoughts are on the topics I brought up today. Please let me know in the comments section below. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching.